Dave, thanks very much for joining us. Would you like to say a little bit about your background for the few people who don't know you?
Oh, to introduce myself a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. I retired after almost 41 years with the research branch of the U.S. Forest Service last September. I was an environmental economist and social scientist most of that time, but then for the last 15 or 17 years or so of my career, I moved into futures research, environmental futures, and my mission was to bring some futures thinking principles, methods, activities to natural resource management and policy and planning. And that was my goal that I was working towards up until my retirement. And I'm still doing a little bit of that. I'm teaching, I'm an adjunct at the University of Minnesota, and I teach environmental futures there. And I have some interaction with my Forest Service colleagues, but they're really struggling with the way the agency is being reorganized, I'll put in quotes, right now. So,
is that a synonym for gutted?
yeah, pretty much gutted. It's very difficult to watch that, and it's very difficult for my former colleagues to experience it. They're really struggling with what's happening. Oh, Dean? Oh, you're muted.
Muted at David's behest. Yeah, we're really feeling that. We're really nervous about fire season here because, you know, they have a bunch of prescription burns planned, and those take money, and that money's all gone, and or most of it. And so are we going to have to pay for it? I guess so. You know, no, it's we live on the front lines of that, but so does half the country now.
Yeah, you should be worried about the fire season because it's going to be a big fire season, especially if the super El Nino picks up. And
Yep.
Yeah. So David Greider, do you want me to share my slides and get started?
Please.
All right.
And it's not really up to me, but
all right, let's see if this works. David and I practiced this yesterday because I'm well known for problems. Can everyone see my beautiful slide? This was taken by my oldest daughter, Liza. All right. Okay, well, this today is a very brief introduction to future studies. It's I mentioned to Professor Bishop in an email that it's a little bit intimidating having him join us today because he led the Future Studies or Foresight program at the University of Houston for many years. But I'm hoping to get a little input from him along the way at different points. Peter, I may call on you to provide your perspective or fill in some gaps that I might be missing.
Well, as bashful as I am to talk about the future, I'll be happy to help you out, David.
Thank you. Thank you. And so let's see here. Here's what I'd like to talk about today. First of all, a very brief history of future studies, and this is just hitting a few of the highlights over the long term, looking back at future studies. Very brief. And then defining future studies as a field and characterizing it as a missing piece of the puzzle for understanding our human predicament, let's call it. Thirdly, some key principles for thinking about the future and thinking like a futurist. I think these are the things that really make future studies unique and a distinct field. And then finally, some strategies for developing foresight. There are a lot of methods. This isn't a methods lecture, so I'm just going to touch on a couple very briefly. And by the way, I'm happy to share these slides. I'm going to go through them fairly quickly because we all have things to do. I want to start out with a question. And if we were in person, I would have people raise their hands, but no need to raise your hand virtually for this. But in all of the years of formal education that you've had, how many have had a class in history? And of course, everyone would be raising their hand because we've had many courses in different aspects of history, American history, modern European history, ancient history. But if I were to ask, and I've done this with many different groups and in the class that I teach at the U, how many have had a course in future studies or foresight or futures? And occasionally I'll get a hand that goes up and it turns out they had a business forecasting class, which is a little different, or they had econometrics or something like that, modeling class that involves some forecasting. But the thing that boggles my mind, and Peter has mentioned this as well, I think it was Ken Boulding who observed that every decision we make is about the future. Every personal decision, every collective decision is about the future, but we're never taught how to think about it, let alone think critically about it. And we haven't been taught these principles for thinking about the future or strategies for improving foresight. And that's something I will never understand why that's the case. Maybe Peter, do you have any insights onto why? Now you're doing it now. You have the mission with your organization, Teach the Future, to bring futures thinking to schools across the world. And but do you have any idea why we spend so much time on history and so little on the future?
Yeah, David, unfortunately, I have lots of ideas about that and too many to share in this short time. So maybe David and them would like me to come back and I'd be happy to share that.
Oh,
Some very
I have an idea.
we don't.
That would be awesome. Yeah.
So we'll set that up in the future. Yeah. And I hope you'll join us too.
Yes. Bob, what was your thought?
Yeah, my thought is that it's not in the interest of the people who have money and power to have us think critically about the future.
Well, that could be one of the aspects of it. Yeah.
But that's what pops in my mind right now.
Yeah.
That's part
so
of it.
Anyway, this is a question that has puzzled me for a long time. And I'm glad that Peter's with us and that his organization is doing so much great work in this area.
Well, I have one idea about that also.
Yeah.
And that is that we're basically reactive, not proactive.
Mm.
And we're very good at being reactive, but we're not so good at being proactive. And we were never really taught how to do that.
Right.
I really like that comment, Bob, and let me get into David's business here. What's the difference in terms of strategy and honor and status between firefighters and fire marshals? What do they do differently? Firefighters, of course, one of the heroes of our society. They come in and do all of those things, whether it's the forest or the building. The fire marshal is frankly just a pain in the ass. You got to move these boxes and you got to, do this, code. And they're the ones who are preventing the fires and they never get any credit. So proactive, the fact that the crisis did not happen, you don't get the Nobel Prize. You don't get the Pulitzer Prize. You only get it if you act after the crisis. Yeah, there's a cultural problem here of giving due credit to people who are doing prevention and preparation versus those who are doing after the fact. I mean, even in medicine, the surgeon is the hero, and the public health person is doesn't really count. In fact, now in our crisis times, it's a person who they don't like at all. Trying to push vaccines and healthy foods and things like that. It's a real cultural problem we have, and we're unfortunately the not happy side of that divide. We're trying to do better about the future and not prevent the problems of the past.
Yeah. Dean, you have your hand up, and you're the last one. Because I need to move on to my.
Yeah. Real quick, I was watching a thing on the human brain and how we make decisions and all that, and of course, we are always predicting the future in milliseconds, right? When we walk, you know, but we don't study what someone said. We don't have a formalized way of making decisions about our lives in the future or someone else's lives or what's going to happen next. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna forge ahead here, and let me talk a little bit, very briefly, about the deep history of future thinking and futures, and it goes way back. It goes back to prehistory. So, quoting from this article, that the ability to anticipate the future is a cornerstone of human cognition, driving survival and evolution. There's archaeological evidence in this paper and a number of other similar kinds of studies about the capacity for foresight in early humans. It's really part of what makes us human, and every civilization throughout history has attempted to understand what's ahead in various ways. One of the interesting milestones, big milestones, I think, in future thinking over time was Sir Thomas More's Utopia way back in 1516. And it's, of course, a work of fiction, but it's really a preferred future that he was describing at that time. And so it was the beginning, I think it was the beginning of a long tradition of utopian writings. There are many works like this over the centuries. The one that I read and really thought was pretty amazing was Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, 2000 to 1887. So it's written from the perspective of the year 2000, and it was published in 1888. Remarkable book. It's obviously in the public domain, so you can get a free PDF of it online if you're interested. H.G. Wells was a towering figure in futures thinking and promoting it, where he's well known as a science fiction writer, which is one way to explore the future. And he did that a lot. But he also published serious nonfiction, like this book from 1901, which is often just called Anticipations, in which he proposed a science of the future. And then later, I think it was on a BBC radio essay that he gave titled Wanted, Professors of Foresight, in which he discussed the need for departments of foresight to deal with the rapid change back in 1932 that was happening. And it's maybe accelerated since then. Another milestone, and I'm jumping over these big milestones in the history of futures thinking, after World War II in the United States was when future studies and futures methods began to be developed, especially in the US military and at Rand Corporation, which was a military spinoff. This is the headquarters in Santa Monica. I had an opportunity to go out there last fall for a meeting that they had on futuring the pyrocene. So the future of wildfire and the pyrocene, the age of fire that we are in. Rand was really like a school for many of the early futurists. Herman Kahn, Olaf Helmer, and many others, and so many methods that came out of that work. Also, Rand, this headquarters is about 2 blocks from the Santa Monica Pier and the beach, so it's a great location if you're out there visiting. In the 1960s and 70s, especially the later 60s, we saw the rise of corporate futures, and most noteworthy is this often cited work by Pierre Wack and his team at Royal Dutch Shell when they were developing scenarios. And so when the OPEC oil embargo struck, Shell was much better prepared to act quickly and to respond to this oil embargo because they had rehearsed the future. And this really sort of cemented the usefulness of scenario planning in the corporate world, or it was at least a big beginning for that. We also saw in the late 60s and throughout the 70s the rise of academic programs, professional societies, consulting firms, including the graduate program in foresight at the University of Houston that Peter was the director of for many years. When I got back into futures 15 or 17 years ago, the first thing I did was to go down to Houston and take the 5-day short course that Peter taught at that time. Now Andy Hines is teaching it, probably with some other faculty there. And it was a fantastic jumpstart for me. But there's a full master's program. This was kind of like an entire master's program crammed into 5 days, which was like trying to take a drink out of a fire hydrant. But it was so useful for me in getting my futures thinking jump-started. There's also the University of Hawaii Research Center for Future Studies, which is kind of waning now, I think, because Jim Dater has retired, the professor that ran the program for so many years. So that's a very brief history of future studies. It's just a few of the highlights. So I wanted to talk about future studies as a missing piece of the puzzle. I think of futures as a social science, a transdisciplinary social science that has a unique contribution compared to all of the other social sciences. You know, economics has its focus on economic efficiency. Political science focuses on power and how that's distributed. Anthropology, culture, geography has that spatial perspective. Future studies has many unique areas that it contributes, especially the much longer time horizon that it considers. It has approaches to deal with fundamental uncertainty, and most of all, this focus on developing foresight, which is unique among the social sciences. I would define future studies as a field, social science, transdisciplinary field of study that explores possible, plausible, and preferable futures with the goal of developing foresight to improve decision-making today. So it's a very practical thing. And that's why it's so widely used in the military, in intelligence agencies, in large corporations, because it has very practical usefulness, like that Shell Oil example illustrates. Fields of study like this are really what's needed to address complex societal challenges. I don't think you can approach them from just one disciplinary perspective. In futures studies, there are quite a few specialized professional societies. These are three that I've been associated with: the Association of Professional Futurists and the World Future Studies Federation. If you go to their websites, you will find a lot of good information about futures and future studies and all of the interesting work that these professional societies do. Unfortunately, the Federal Foresight Community of Interest had been a very useful meeting place for federal agencies, and several dozen, 2 or 3 dozen federal agencies that had either small futures programs or at least individuals who are working in this area trying to promote it within their agencies. And basically, in the last year, the FFCOI has gone silent. Their website is not working. Last time I tried to get on there, and their activities have ceased. So that's really a shame. Future Studies has, for being a small field, it has a surprising number of peer-reviewed academic journals. I've published in a bunch of these. Peter has published in a bunch of these. The 2 bottom ones are newer journals. The long-time journals are Futures and Technological Forecasting and Social Change, both of which I think go back to the late 60s and are really well-respected journals. Future Studies has a wide range and a large number of methodologies, and I'll talk some of them developed by futurists, many of them borrowed and adapted from other fields, but the 3 that I'll talk about in a little while are environmental scanning or horizon scanning, scenarios and the futures wheel, because I think those are just to illustrate the usefulness of those. Futures is work takes place in a lot of different fields, including, well, I guess I'm going to have to X that one out too, because it's no longer happening in the Forest Service or the CDC. I have futures colleagues at the CDC who have left or are no longer doing their foresight work. And so don't mean to be a downer with all that, but in every branch of the U.S. military, in every intelligence agency, there's foresight work going on. We had some contact with the folks at the Secret Service and their foresight group a few years ago, and really impressive stuff that they were doing. And then finally, this iceberg metaphor for future studies as a field. You don't see much that's really visible, but there's a lot that's happening below the surface inside corporate structures and organizations, inside military and intelligence agencies, but it's not made public. A lot of it remains out of sight. And so that's one of the characteristics of future studies, is that it's like an iceberg. Peter, you look deep in thought. What do you think about that iceberg metaphor? Is that accurate? You think you're muted?
Yeah, it sounds like an excuse, and it may be. Whatever. I'm glad you pointed out the community of interest. I was at their very first meeting in DC 10 or 12 years ago. 250 people showed up.
Wow.
Everybody was surprised. FBI, Secret Service, Coast Guard, all the military organizations, all the intelligence organizations, every department sent somebody. And the interesting thing is that they didn't know each other. They were all surprised. My gosh, there's hundreds of people doing foresight in the U.S. government. And typical, I mean, other countries like Canada and Brazil and whatever have designated departments doing Singapore, whatever. U.S., there's a lot of it, but of course, in typical American fashion, it's all mixed up and chaotic, and nobody's organized, and it's very creative and innovative. So I remember that meeting, and everybody was aghast at how many people showed up that had actually foresight responsibilities. So you're right, David, and I'm sorry to hear about the community of interest. That was great organization.
It was a really great organization, and it was such a way for all of this federal foresight to become aware and build and cooperate with each other. And so that's been discouraging.
Things change, unfortunately. Thank you for that. Thank you for.
And so let me move on to some principles, some key principles for thinking about the future. And this comes out of this publication that I authored a while ago. I had, my graduate training was in economics, environmental economics, and that's a field that is very clear on core principles. There's at least a half a dozen textbooks in economics with the title Principles of Economics. And so I gathered up from a wide range of futures writing, books and journal articles, and extracted some principles out of there. And published this. Later, I'll paste in the chat the link to this publication if you're interested, and some other papers that I'll refer to in the next section as well. So the first principle is the future is plural. We talk about the future singular, but it's really much more productive to be thinking about a number of possible alternative futures, as Professor Massini, Italian future studies professor, noted. And if nothing else, just like in investing, if you put all your eggs in one basket, that's not a good investment strategy. If you base long-term decisions on a single view of the future, that's a bad strategy as well. So the alternative futures perspective is what we're talking about here. The idea of futures is not to predict the future, singular, but to develop foresight to prepare for a range of possible futures and to build resilience into our systems. I like this graphic. It's actually taken from some folks at the National Park Service who were doing some scenario planning work to contrast a futures approach to long-range forecasting approach. And in traditional forecasting, they look at one future, singular, taking the data about what we know today, plugging it into some sort of model, maybe doing a sensitivity analysis because some of the variables are uncertain, and but still looking at just the one future. In future studies, multiple futures are explored by taking what we know today, recognizing those fundamental uncertainties, using various futures methods like scenario planning to look at a much wider range of possible futures, from the sunny aspirational future that we want to the stormy worst case scenario that we need to be prepared for. So I love this graphic that they came up with in their scenario work. A second principle is that there are 4 types of futures that we should consider. So this is kind of related to the previous one about plural futures. But first of all, there's this very large set of possible futures. And it is an extremely large set indeed. Most people don't think about, don't even like to think about such a wide range of possibilities, but it's important to do that. As Professor Wendell Bell, sociologist and futurist at Yale University, said in one of his classic futures books, the world is full of things that some really smart people thought were absolutely convinced, in fact, were impossible at the time. And so this is part of futures thinking, is to encompass a wide range of possibilities. A second type of future is plausible, much smaller, but still of a large set. These are futures that most people would agree that could happen. There's a fair amount of agreement that something is plausible. There's a subset of plausible futures called probable, or the business as usual, or what we think is the most likely future. This is, in fact, what most organizations plan for, is what they think is going to happen. But as Herman Kahn said, the most likely future isn't. In other words, what we think is the most likely future may in fact be a low probability event because of the prevalence of surprise and disruption and uncertainty. Herman Kahn also said the most surprising future would be one with no surprises. And then the fourth type of futures, these are the 4 Ps, is a preferable future, our aspirational future, of a positive vision of where we should be heading. Can't really overstate the importance of preferable futures for society and for thinking about the future. You could add a 5th P there, which would be preposterous. Last time I talked with this group, it was about wild cards, which might be considered preposterous or ridiculous futures because they seem so wild and unexpected. But and so we were talking about Earl Joseph earlier, and Earl is, was one of the founders of Minnesota Futurists. He was a big figure in futures work in Minnesota. Really an amazing guy. He was one of the people that when I heard him speak, when I was an undergraduate, that was one of the things that inspired me to create my future studies program, individually designed program when I was an undergrad. And one of the things that Earl said, so I'm going back here to the possible futures and just the critical importance of thinking about a wide range of possibilities, is that almost anything can be done in 20 years. I think if Earl were with us today, he might say, well, almost anything can be done in 5 or 10 years now because of the pace of change. And he meant this quite literally. And so just some quick examples. From this announcement in 1961 just 8 or so years later, there were boots on the moon. An incredible technological achievement. It's also not just technology, but political and social and cultural change sometimes happens very quickly, like the end of apartheid in South Africa. This is something that David Greider pointed out to me, and it's such an interesting 2 photos here. The same morning, 13 years apart, the same avenue in New York City, and on the right there is one car, and on the right, on the right side rather, there's one horse-drawn carriage. 13 years different. So that gives me a little bit of hope that we can increase our share of EVs in a short period of time here in the next 10 or 13 years. Another thing that's happened very quickly in about 10 years, that wind and solar went from being the most expensive new energy to the least expensive. And it's just a remarkable thing that was not expected, even by people who work in the field, that dramatic drop in costs for solar and wind and battery storage that has happened. And highly recommend Bill McKibben's book, Here Comes the Sun. So there are lots of other examples that we could think of, rapid change. But the point is the importance of really thinking about a wide range of possibilities in futures thinking. That was the thing that I really loved about going to the World Future Society meetings. You'd have hundreds of people who were willing to entertain some real possibility thinking. And it was such a fun conference to go to. A third principle, this is the last one I'm going to go into in any detail, but the future is open, by which I mean it's not fixed. We can influence it in a positive direction. Our choices, our actions make a difference. Jaime Cascio at the Institute for the Future said the shape of tomorrow arises from the choices we make today, which is a real basis for hope and for opportunity and positive change. And this is one of the speakers that I've had in my class the last couple of years is Professor Heidi Roop. She's over on the St. Paul campus of the University of Minnesota. She's a climate scientist, but I love this quote from her book about our climate future. It has not yet been determined. Excellent book if you're interested in climate action. So there are lots of principles for thinking about the future. I talked about plural, the 4 Ps, possible, plausible, probable, and preferable. The future is open. There are lots and lots of others, including these and more. These are some of the, I've been writing short chapters for a book project since I retired, and these are some of the ones that I've been writing about. Characterizing the future, I'll just give you a couple of quick examples. The future is cascading. If there's a big change that happens, or maybe a small change, sometimes a small change can trigger a cascade of change. There are first order direct impacts. Each of those has second order impacts. They may have third and higher order impacts as well. So it's this cascade of change is, as I remember from that short course in Houston, Peter said, the study of the future is the study of change. And this is one of the ways that change unfolds that we don't usually think about. There was a study that showed that when you ask people about the effects of change, they just think about the direct impacts and not those higher order impacts, which may be the most important ones. The future is emotional is one of my short chapters. And there are all kinds of studies that show that emotions are really the big drivers of decisions that we make. And remember, every decision is about the future. And so it's important to not forget about that psychological, emotional dimension of futures thinking. The future is fleeting. It has a short shelf life. Insights about the future do. Hence the importance of ongoing foresight work within an organization. Even this group, Minnesota Futurists, is really an ongoing processing ideas about the future. And thinking about trends and how they change over time. So you're a good example of the importance of ongoing foresight work over a period of well over 50 years for this group. The future is used, or as Jaime Cascio said in an article, "Where's my jetpack? I thought we were all supposed to have jetpacks by now." And these are those ideas about the future that come from popular culture that end up getting recycled and used over and over again, called used futures, or Sohail Inayatullah, futurist, calls them legacy futures. Personally, I loved the Jetsons when I was a kid growing up, my favorite cartoon. But it's kind of amazing how it's a go-to meme for anything related to the future. So these ideas really get stuck in our heads and shape our perception of what could lie ahead. So those are some key principles. Let's see. Let's take a short break here in terms of comments. If anyone wants to jump in with thoughts about those principles or anything that was triggered in your mind,
Can you
Pardon?
stop sharing that slide briefly?
Oh,
I
yeah.
can see faces. Thank you. I love the Jetsons too.
Oh, weren't they great? Oh, Carol, yeah.
Yes. Well, in answer to your question, the thing I find most interesting is the difference between all of the futures that you have talked about that came faster than we thought they would.
Mm.
And the sort of thing that, like,
You didn't want to take that left, huh? That right. You're more a U-turn type of person.
Oh,
You're more a U-turn type of person.
Bob, could you mute, please?
No,
Oh, sorry.
yeah. Oh, sorry, Carol, go ahead.
okay, the sort of thing like controlled fusion, which has been 20 years away for the last 80 years.
Right.
And would it be possible to look at the history of futurist prediction and divide it into these two categories? The ones that came faster than we thought, and the ones that really hung up.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation, and that would be really useful. There's been some of that, and I know for a lot of major technologies, from the time when they're first thought about or developed to the point where they become widespread commercially available, it is quite a long period. And there's this idea that they're going to happen very quickly, but oftentimes they don't. Yeah. Wayne, you had your hand up.
If we could see any pattern in the type of predictions that come faster than we thought and the type of predictions that are coming slower than we thought they would.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be very interesting. Wayne, you had your hand up?
Yes, I thinking of the presentations like some other speakers. I grew up with the Jetsons, and when 2000 occurred, that book of "Where's My Jetpack" really impacted me. Of going, this is not the future we're promised. But I guess one thing that really struck me is going back earlier. You mentioned there's a federal group of interagency doing the futures. I'm curious: is my old agency CMS a part of that, or was it, since it's now the organization's now default? Because one of the things I did as an actuary for CMS was projecting long-term Medicare and Medicaid costs and then overlapping with Social Security. So I was just curious if CMS has been involved with other agencies on it, because I could only recall Social Security and the Treasury being in it.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that, but and it's too bad that the Federal Foresight Community of Interest website is no longer up because on one of their tabs, they listed all of the federal agencies that have been that were involved with FFCOI activities and foresight work, and can't get to that now. But I don't recall seeing them on that list, but I would be kind of surprised if they weren't, because it was a long list of agencies, really kind of amazing.
Yeah, I'll have to ask some of my colleagues, because I mean, the last time I really did that much for assumptions, long-term assumptions, was the early 2000s, when the book putting all the variables in a stochastic model. And I'll give the Bush people high credit for bringing out some of the best statisticians in the US and the world to do that. Of course, Bush wanted to do it so he could say, Social Security has $1 trillion deficit. We can't do that, so we have to cut it. And unfortunately, the chief actuary at CMS bought my argument, saying, hey, you can't tell people it's a $3 trillion deficit present value without giving them a context.
Right,
and it would be a present value of about $150 trillion GDP over the time period. So it's a big amount, but it's doable. Anyway, that's my soapbox. But as soon as you mentioned federal, I went, oh, I'm having flashbacks to my pre-retirement days. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going down the list of people that have their hands up, and Dean, it looks like you're next.
Yeah. Can you? I'm over ODing on the Jetsons. Can you?
Oh,
yeah. I like to see the ugly faces in my case.
Oh, okay. You could just.
You got to unshare. I can't unshare you.
Oh yeah, I don't know how to unshare this. I mean, if I
go all the way down to the bottom, and it'll be red. Stop share.
Oh, okay. I'll stop sharing, but then I'm always apprehensive about getting it back.
Okay, I can live with it, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, I'm sorry. Where am I? I've dropped off. Yeah, and this so reminds me of, it wasn't a Nova, but it was a PBS 5-hour special on humans and how we became human. And of course, one of the early, and most people here know Darwin is my God, Jesus Christ, whatever. But it is what, it wasn't just the opposable thumb, which helped, right? It was the cranium, the brain, that allowed certain people with a certain intelligence or whatever to say, hey, this is an ice age. The mastodons are going away or whatever, and move the clan, move the tribe. And in other words, to intuitively, I don't know, but in other words, we're almost a mistake. It was only our brains that kept us alive. It wasn't our brawn or anything else.
Right.
The other real quick point was emotion, and they got into that. And every decision we make in our lives, minute to minute, evolves that part of the brain that evolves emotion, because emotion is fight or flight. It's being happy. It's having sex. It's eating. All of that. So emotion is a very important component of how we make decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was there's a book that I'm trying to find a reasonably priced used copy of it, but the title is The Psychology of Thinking About the Future, and it's a book of chapters written by psychologists who have studied how people think about the future in all of its different dimensions. And I had it checked out of the university library for a while, and it really is a deep dive into that emotional component. So Stan, you had your hand up as well.
When you drive, it's important to drive by looking out your windshield in front. But you can also look through your rearview mirror. And I see that as being a metaphor for how we understand future versus the past and history. And the thing I would notice about history, in the study of history, is that typically you study the history of science or the history of art or the history of of architecture, the history of this and that. And I think that that talks about the tree that you were describing. The future has lots of different branches and so forth. One of the things that I look at with regard to what changed mostly during the 20th century was the transition from the tube to the transistor, for example. And Carol mentioned the fusion reactor. I remember writing papers about fusion reactors back in high school. So that 20 years out is crazy.
Yeah.
It makes me wonder.
I said it's been 20 years away for the last 80 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I meant this. I meant to agree with you. I'm not disagreeing with you.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to say about this is I partially think that the fossil fuel industry is so much in control. I suspect that there might be a more rapid addressing fusion if there would be someone with their brakes being secretly holding their brakes on that for several different reasons. And something else that I want to mention, this is kind of a new technology thing, is that there's a lot of research going on right now in fusion computing, or not fusion, but photon computing, using light to do the processing rather than having light come to the processor, turning it to the electrons, and then having it go back to light again. They're actually doing the computation with photons, which will reduce the amount of heat, increase the speed, and so forth. That could be the next golden opportunity for computation without the, in quotes, history or the problem of sucking up a lot of heat and energy.
Yeah, interesting. Bob, you had your hand up. You're muted. Are you there?
I
There you
see.
go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, there'll be a little noise for a second because I'm at Sebastian Joe's. But I wanted to ask two questions. I have a goddaughter, would that be right? A god person? Anyway, she's some kind of god. And I gotta leave, guys. I'll come back.
Okay.
I'll come back. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. So wait.
Tom,
Wait, no, I wasn't saying that. I was saying it to the guys yelling at me. Let me ask my question.
Okay.
Let me ask my question.
Yep.
I have a god. She's chosen McGill. Okay. To go to college.
Godchild.
What?
Godchild.
Yeah, godchild. Thank you. I have a
That's the
godchild.
generic you want.
And she is chosen McGill. Does McGill have a futurist program?
Ooh. Peter, do you know if McGill has a futurist program?
No, not at all. As far as I understand it, actually, it has a history. However, you mentioned because who is the medium as the message guy?
Yeah. McLuhan.
McLuhan was at McGill. Obviously, a great thinker. Not exactly a futurist, but certainly a great observer of change in modern society. So that's when I think McGill. But no, I don't think there's a futurist program there.
Okay. The other question is, so as I've fiddled around with this stuff over the last decade or two, one of the things that impressed me the most is called the implications wheel.
Yeah.
And so the implications wheel, I was going to ask you, how do you go from the first level implication to the second level implication, and how do you use Bayesian analysis? I like Bayesian analysis because I understand it. It doesn't mean it's good, but I like it that I understand it. So
yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you mentioned the implications wheel, because in my next and final segment of my slides, that is one of the things I'm going to talk about, because it's one of my favorite methods. I'm just going to briefly talk about it, but I took the training from Joel Barker.
Right, we had him speak to the group.
Yeah, And I've published a bunch of studies using the implications wheel. I'll paste some into the chat when I'm done with the slides here. But yeah, thank you.
I am looking forward to those slides and your book.
Okay, the book will be a year from now, but the slides,
luckily, I'm planning on still being alive. So
send out.
Could I pay you for an advanced copy, Dave?
Okay, thank you for this. It's been interesting. I'm going to stay as long as I can. Okay.
Okay.
Take care, guys.
Tom, you had a question. Been patiently waiting.
Yeah, someone I don't know, 10 minutes ago mentioned putting variables into some kind of stochastic model. Well, to some extent, that's been done. At least, as far as human societies are concerned. Peter Turchin, with his Cliodynamics, has created a system that's a lot like Asimov's psychohistory. It's he uses, I don't know how many dozens of different input variables studying societies, and basically using ideas of chaos theory and a lot of partial differential equations. He's put it all together to make projections of how a society will progress over time. And his predictions, and basically he tested it by looking at past societies and seeing with the initial conditions how it ends up. It's been pretty successful. It predicted this kind of chaos that we're going through right now in the US. So I'm just wondering if you were familiar with Cliodynamics.
I've heard of it. I'm not real familiar with it, but there are lots of I mean, the original limits to growth study was a big systems model that and I saw something recently that so far it's kind of on track, which is scary because it predicted collapse eventually. But yeah, I'm gonna have to look that up and get some more details. If you have any good reference, pop it in the chat.
Well, he's written a couple, several popular books about it. One of the more recent ones was called End Times, and it refers to the United States.
Yeah, thank you. And Dean, you get the last word before I forge ahead on my last section.
Yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so I loved your fifth P or fourth P, preposterous. I mean, you realize that sending a man to the moon and landing a man on the moon, returning him safely in 1960 was almost preposterous, right? Many people said that. And yet it came true. And now it takes 9 years to replace the Francis Scott Key Bridge in Maryland. You know, I don't think things happen faster. AI ain't going to build a bridge. So, I mean, you know, our maglev train from LA to San Francisco, 40 years in the making, $400 trillion spent, and they've got about 10 miles. And we can't even do that in 30, 40 years. So I don't see the future coming faster. The infrastructure future, infrastructure matters. It ain't all ones and zeros.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a very good point. But sometimes the future does come sometimes it's very slow. This idea of slow problems over many decades or slow developments. But there's the punctuated equilibrium idea from ecology that sometimes evolution and change happens very quickly.
In a heartbeat, as in the meteor that landed on the Yucatan. But yeah, I mean, that slide about that, I've seen that similar, 13 years for automobiles to replace horses in Manhattan. Amazing.
Yeah. Although there was still horse-drawn wagons and stuff in Manhattan, but it was really remarkable how fast how fast that change happened, which gives me some hope that for the kind of climate, a lot of my futures work is focused on climate futures And it's a race against time for that. Would it be okay if I moved on? Tom, you have your hand up, but
just something real
yeah.
quick. The scientists at, I forget which major oil company was, Exxon or Shell or something, 70 years ago predicted that global warming would occur due to the oil companies' activities, burning oil, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But their own company denied the science because it would have affected their bottom line. And there's a lot of that going on now. So it doesn't make me real hopeful because the entrenched interests that are very wealthy are kind of suppressing, and maybe that's why some of the agencies you're talking about have kind of gone away, are suppressing this kind of information.
Yeah. That's a good observation. I try to remain hopeful, and that gave me a nice boost of hope reading Rebecca Solnit's Hope in the Dark a couple of years ago. It was published, I think, 10 years ago, but it's in the public domain because she made it available. Anyway, let me jump on and talk about strategies for developing foresight. And like the rest of this talk, I'm just going to hit some highlights, because we could have a full focus for one of these sessions on any one of these strategies. I mentioned earlier there are lots of different methods in future studies, and I'm going to just touch on these three. These are three of the ones that I've used a lot, along with a few others like backcasting. And recently I started using the Futures Triangle, which is a really fun and useful brainstorming technique with a group. I would love to do that with Minnesota Futurists if we ever had an in-person meeting. I guess it can be done online as well, but let me go. Horizon scanning is maybe the most meat and potatoes essential tool in the Futurists toolkit, I think. It's a process, hopefully a systematic process, for finding and interpreting the meaning of signals of change, all types of signals, mostly in the external environment of an organization or a field. And in the Forest Service, one of the things that my group developed with some guidance from Andy Hines, Professor Andy Hines at the University of Houston, was our Forest Futures Horizon Scanning project. And I like this quote from Jane McGonigal of the Institute for the Future. It's from her book, Imaginable, which I have right here. I've just been reading this book lately. It's a great book. I was not expecting it to be that good, but signals of change are the raw materials for futurists. It's the data. We don't have any data about the future, but we do have signals of change that could be indicators of what could come. I should have dropped this slide, but it gives you an idea of the process for horizon scanning, beginning with defining the boundaries of a scanning project, collecting signals of change, storing them in a database, analyzing and synthesizing them, making sense out of these maybe hundreds or thousands of signals of change that have been collected, and then communicating the results to decision makers and using them in planning, management, and policy. That's the horizon scanning process. Often it's done more informally. And this, I think, actually horizon scanning would be a great activity for Minnesota Futures, just to, when you find a signal of change that is interesting to you, you could just paste it into a database that Minnesota Futurists sets up, and then people could go in there and look at all the different signals and try to make sense out of them. In horizon scanning, we try to look at all different types of signals, from the earliest weak signals of change to the big broad drivers, the mega trends, mega forces, to wild cards. And all of those get put in the database. In horizon scanning, we try to scan across all of the domains: social, technical, economic, environmental, political. In horizon scanning, we try to scan across the different horizons. Horizon 1 being things that are happening now, may be relatively low uncertainty, all the way out to horizon 3, those earliest weak signals of change that are very much speculative and may never happen, but they could also be game changers if they did happen. And then intermediate is the horizon 2 signals of change. Some of the outputs of horizon scanning, these are some from our work in the strategic foresight group in the Forest Service that I did. So we always talk to decision makers, policy makers in the Washington office, in the regional offices. And by the way, I'll put links to all these publications in the chat in a minute. So we've done presentations and then written reports or articles on things like the future of outdoor recreation, the future of arboriculture, the signals of change that could shape the future of forestry. And these all came directly out of our horizon scanning database and work. A second way to develop foresight, a second method that is really core, is scenario planning. And I like this, there we go. I like this definition from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that a scenario is a coherent, internally consistent, and plausible description of a possible future state of the world. The IPCC is not a futures organization, but in their wisdom, they have been doing a type of scenario planning from the very beginning. And the idea in scenario planning is to help us plan for a range of plausible futures so we can build resilience. There are many different methods for generating scenarios. I mentioned the IPCC, and their scenarios look out to the year 2100. And because there's so much uncertainty about what future policies and what technologies will be available to address climate change, there's a wide range of possibilities looking out that far. This is an older IPCC figure. So quantitative modeling approaches to scenario planning. There's the classic 2x2 matrix approach, which Peter Schwartz at the Global Business Network championed, among others. And the figure on the left side of the screen there is, that's from a study that colleagues did on at the request of some folks in the Washington office of the Forest Service very early in the pandemic, because they were struggling with, if the pandemic is big and the virus has a big impact, how is that going to affect wildland firefighting? And so the two fundamental uncertainties that form the axes for this 2x2 matrix were how severe the COVID pandemic would be and how severe the fire year would be, the wildfires that year. And we came up with 4 scenarios that informed their discussions in Washington about this topic. I'll put a link to that paper in the chat as well. Another scenario generation approach is the aspirational futures approach developed by Clem Beazold and others at the Institute for Alternative Futures, which looks at the full range of possibilities, but it also has kind of an emphasis on the visionary or aspirational side of things. And Clem feels very strongly that that's an important thing to emphasize. So Peter wrote this great, with a couple of his colleagues from the University of Houston, wrote a really good overview. It's a few years ago now, but looking at all the different scenario techniques, and to read from the abstract there, the paper finds 8 categories of techniques that include a total of 23 variations used to develop scenarios. This is a great source to go to for if you want to find out more about all these different approaches to developing scenarios. Okay, I'm sorry, I forgot. Who was it that mentioned the implications wheel or futures wheel? Was that you, Tom? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And so this is a technique that I think is very useful. It's a structured group process for identifying the potential consequences of any type of change. The implications wheel is a more structured approach than the generic futures wheel is. It was developed by St. Paul-based futurist Joel Barker. And here's kind of how it looks from up above. Yes, it's a group process. I like to do it in person. I've done it online as well, but there's some major change and you want to explore the implications of that, the cascading implications. It might be a new technology, an emerging trend, a policy change, and that goes at the center of the wheel. And then the direct implications are identified through there's a set of rules for brainstorming in this process. Here, there are just 4 direct consequences that are identified in those blue dots. There might be a dozen, but that would be a very large wheel to analyze. Then each of those direct implications has second order implications. Each of the second orders have third order implications. Generally, you don't go beyond the third order because it gets pretty tenuous. And then there's this, after all of these bubbles are filled in by the various small groups that are brainstorming, there's a scoring process that scores each one of the implications for likelihood and desirability, which makes it really a powerful technique for analyzing the results and identifying the really important implications. Here's one of the sheets when I've done it in person. This was actually from the very first implications wheel that I facilitated. Down in the lower right there, it says Warren, Pennsylvania in 2015. So that was quite a while ago. And this was a group of public land managers. I guess that is, I'm just going to conclude by talking about the usefulness of future studies and more formal futures thinking. This long-term perspective is critical. It's useful for exploring key uncertainties and surprises. As in the Shell oil case and the oil embargo, it can decrease the reaction time to rapid change. Useful for identifying unanticipated consequences. That's really what the implications wheel does, is it uncovers unintended and unanticipated consequences. It encourages people to think big and broad about all the possibilities, and it's especially important. Preferred futuring or visioning is key to shaping our preferred future. And I'll close with this quote from, I love Peter Schwartz's book, The Art of the Long View. To me, it's just one of the all-time classics of future studies. And Peter, at some point in the book, talks about the importance of sparking ongoing conversations and how people in resilient companies and organizations continually hold strategic conversations about the future. And that's, like I said earlier, that's really what this group is all about. So I'm going to put my email up there. Please feel free to follow up if you want to contact me. And like I said, I will paste. I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And there we go. Open up the discussion. It's now 11:08, so we have some time for discussion. If anyone, Dean, you had a comment? Oh, you're muted.
I am muted. That very last slide about the organizations think about, I mean, isn't that a lot of the Silicon Valley? They have people making big bucks thinking about, I assume, I hope, what might come about, what might happen, future planning, scenarios, probable, plausible. And that's how you stay in business, right? I mean, oil companies do that. Everybody better do that, or you're not going to survive. Deck Computer didn't do that. Oh, who's going to want a computer on their desk? Are you kidding me? Famous last words. Yep.
Yep. Yeah, that is true.
I'm gonna continue to be skeptical about the power. I don't know, how many of you are familiar with Sheldon Whitehouse, the senator from Rhode Island? Sheldon Whitehouse,
I've heard of him.
Hmm? I'm a big time follower of him. Rhode Island is being cut off right now. They have an entire wind farm offshore that could be producing power, but it's not because of the current administration. And there's no doubt in my mind that big oil is following all of this futurist discussion more than anybody else because they have the biggest stake in it. And especially when you get around the climate change groups, they're going to be finding every tactic. They're going to be writing papers, finding every tactic possible to diminish the power of the renewable resource type people arguments because they are in control. They are the incumbent power. They've had it for ever since the mid 1700s. They've had the power to control the economy and to diminish the quality of the environment. Yes, there was some increase in the strength of the middle class during specific time frames, and I don't deny that fuel is powering my house, my lights, and so forth. I don't deny that, but there has to be some point of recognition. I just sometimes can't believe that for their own sake and for the sake of their own families, they don't see the potential of trying to be more be more aggressive about the way that Norway and the way that Ireland and the way that Australia has embraced renewables. America has gotten way behind the other countries that are in that particular fast forward, fast moving, fast thinking way of seeing renewables. And we are still more considering trying to dampen that particular experience.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the guest speakers in my class this spring was an economist, Jay Coggins at the University of Minnesota. He's in the applied econ department, and he talked about the renewable revolution. And his main point, or his bottom line, was that because of what's happened with the cost of renewables now and battery storage, that economically it just doesn't make sense for this revolution to not happen. And yet there, like you allude, there are forces working against the person in the White House right now who hates wind power for some reason. So Dean?
Yeah, no one else has their hand up. I will always defer. Yeah, Stan, to answer your question, those people don't care because their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be immune from that because of their wealth. And the same thing applies to Silicon Valley. Do you realize all the giants in Silicon Valley do not send their kids to school with a cell phone? They have special schools where they are tech-free. I'm talking no laptops early on, paper and pencil, because they are smarter. This trash is for the unwashed masses and is how we get rich, and it ain't for our kids. Now, I'm not saying they don't have tech, but I'm saying they send them to an elite educational high schools and whatnot that make them have a conscious brain that's not wired to a cell phone. And I posted on the chat all this, and I mean this in this is a great intellectual discussion, right? And I mean that in the best terms, not pejoratively. But how with our current society, government, and how do we make this rubber hit the road? You see what I mean? How does this become institutional, societal, cultural, governmental? That's my
Yeah.
question. China is pretty good at that.
And I think it starts with futures literacy and education, which a few countries are kind of advanced in, like Singapore and Finland.
Yeah.
My experience in Finland was there was pretty high futures literacy. But
big
Peter
time.
Bishop, we have one of the experts, the world expert in futures literacy. And so, Peter, maybe you could address that. But also, I'm really hoping that sometime you could talk to Minnesota Futurists about your organization and the work that you're doing and the curriculums that you've developed. And that would be so amazing.
Thanks, David. Yeah, well, you already stole the bottom line there. In my estimation, the only way to change culture ultimately is through education and getting to young people before they have adopted the paradigms and the concepts and of the existing culture. We can learn as adults, we can change as adults, but we don't have the power to change the culture. So we're still educating students in the older paradigms of the future. And that is unfortunate. And Teach the Future, of course, a very tiny little effort to bring cultural change, not just business change and not just change in forecasting and professional foresight, but how the culture thinks about the future. So, but a long-term project, visionary, clearly, but that's what it'll be. I'm always happy to talk about that. In fact, I think I gave a talk at Minnesota Futurists some years ago on this, but happy to do it again, of course. Thanks, Dane, for the question.
David Greider, you're muted. Were you going to say something?
Time to do it again. When would you like to be on the schedule?
Well, you tell me. I'm Saturday mornings are fairly free around here, so give me a shout.
I will do that.
Great.
Yeah, just to follow up what Peter said, cultural and all that. I go to Walmart, believe it or not, although I'm doing more and more Amazon because I'm getting lazy. But I see 2-year-olds, 4-year-olds routinely in shopping carts with a device, and we know that is like giving heroin to prepubescent kids. And it is changing their brains. And there have been a lot of studies on we're never going to get these brains back. We're going to have a whole generation of antisocial people because of the way we use technology. We don't let kids under 16 or 15 drive cars, right? That's dangerous. But we let them ride e-bikes and we let them have cell phones in their crib. It scares me. I'm sorry, but I'm a bit scared.
Yep. Oh, David Greider.
Yeah, it's hard not to be a bit scared these days if you're paying any kind of attention. But in particular, we think that AI is going to change things massively. And to the extent that we encourage it to do our thinking for us, we know that that's going to have particular effects. To the extent that we can use it as a tool to help our learning, perhaps we might sidestep that concern, if you will. But it's awfully easy. And I don't see Bob with us at this point. He wasn't actually on the Zoom last week, but he did contact me. I did that presentation with regard to some of the books that I had mentioned, and he used AI to get a quick summary of them to see how they might apply to the discussion. But certainly AI is going to open up possibilities for education at lower cost, potentially higher effectivity, if you will.
Effective?
That's open to question.
Hmm.
But certainly one of the trends that we, I would think, would want to be looking at, talking about in this group.
Hmm. Tom, you had a question or comment?
Well, more of a comment. I think it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, we actually had a session where we used the futures wheel.
Oh,
I can't remember who led that session. I think he's probably deceased now. And I don't remember the topic, but it was an interesting exercise, and I'd like to do something like that again.
yeah, that would be fun. And my experience with it, with all kinds of different groups, is from students to senior scientists. Well, first of all, the more diverse the group, the better foresight will be developed. But the point I was going to make is that because of the nature of the brainstorming in the implications wheel process, people just really get excited and charged up about it. And you get so much positive feedback after a session like that, because they're thinking about things in the future and implications in ways that they hadn't thought about before with that cascade thinking.
Dean, is your hand still up?
Yes, it is.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, sorry. Yeah, so AI and yeah, it is a dichotomy. It is very much a two-edged sword, right? You hear wonderful stuff every day of what AI can do, and all that good stuff. But I just saw a piece where the rubber hits the checkbook, and using AI to scam seniors out of their money, and it is so convincing. And this was a very intelligent woman, and she got a phone call from blah blah blah, and it was her nephew, and da, 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 and she mailed off $26,000, and luckily her bank caught it, and she said, I never dreamed that I would get scammed like this. I thought I was a smart 68-year-old. Turns out I wasn't. And so there's a thing on fraud, internet fraud, $192 billion in 2024. Right now, last year, they estimate that the AI portion of that is $2 billion and growing exponentially, hyperbolically, whatever the word is. And because before it took one scammer, one at a time, to scam one person, and now they can do 100 or 1,000 with AI, and then they get the hits. The other thing, real quick, was that AI will soon be producing its own commercials and buying time on TV and the internet, all autonomously. Yeah, is right.
I don't know how educators, especially writing, people who teach writing at whatever level, are dealing with AI. In the class that I teach, the final assignment, final project is an oral presentation in class, and that way they can. But this year I gave them an option of writing a final paper instead, because there's always some people who are profoundly uncomfortable with public speaking.
I'm one.
And the one, yeah, and the only one of the 21 students chose that option. And this was a guy who was from China, young man, honors student, and he was really smart, but his English was not at all fluent. And he turned in a final paper. It was about 15 pages long with the references and everything, that was so unbelievably good. It was like PhD level thinking about what his topic. And But he pointed out to me very clearly, yes, I used AI, but I fell within the guidelines that you provided in your syllabus. And I said, okay, you got me. But what I really worry about is students short-circuiting the learning process and learning how to write and do other thinking, and because it is so easy, and you can, if you have the right prompts, you can get some really good results out of chatbots and other AI programs. So.
Yeah, you can. Real quick before Stan, with a headphone, why couldn't an oral presentation be done with a teleprompter in your ear? It could be theoretically, like somebody cue cards or whatever, theoretically. And
yeah,
that's probably right around the corner. I don't know. Stan?
David, would you mind? I've got a 5-minute video of Neil Hanauer talking about AI and neoliberalism and economics. I think it's really good.
Yeah. Lynn, you had a question on that, or was it something else?
No, I was just thinking that we should be sure that you've covered everything you want to before we get too far afield.
Yeah, I have. And by the way, I did paste those links in the chat space. So if you're interested in any of those publications that I briefly referenced, just copy those, and you can follow up on your own if you're interested in those. They're all taken from the Forest Service research database called Tree Search, where all of our work got archived. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Lynn. But here we go. Stan's video. He said it's about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Wow, that was great. Thanks for sharing that, Stan.
Well, I don't know whether he had the solution of subscribing to his channel. I don't know how you're going to be able to resolve the neoliberalistic tendencies, nor, I mean, the idea that neoliberalism has a dominance in the economic realm and the fossil fuel industry has a dominance in the energy realm. Those things have had their power so long that to visualize that other technique is going to be challenging because it hasn't been proven or shown to be proven that it would work, with the exception of maybe a short period of time somewhere between World War I and 1965, World War II and 1965, when the upper classes were being taxed sufficiently to have a little bit less gap between the income gap between the wealthy and super wealthy and the average worker.
Right. Lynn, you had your hand up.
No, I was first, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Well, I was just going to comment on the video itself, not the content. I find from experience that I'm suspicious of someone sitting at a table being videoed talking about some relatively incendiary idea and having gestures, and I'd like to put an AI on that video and analyze whether the gestures are cyclic, because it looked to me like they had a short clip of his gestures and they kept putting them in. So, was that really him? Perhaps he sponsored it. Perhaps he told an AI, make this talk of me saying these things.
Yep.
But I'm suspicious of the video.
Tom, were you next?
Yeah, a couple points now. Just responding to Lynn. I've seen a number of videos where a respected like news people or something are seen hawking various trying to sell various items or something. And I'm sure that's AI, but it's pretty convincing looking. But what I wanted to say is I object to Nick Hanauer's terminology. Specifically the term neoliberalism. What he's really talking about is supply side economics, or trickle down economics, which was instituted basically during Ronald Reagan's term and has been growing ever since. Because whenever people hear the word liberal, they can't distinguish between neoliberalism and liberalism. They think Democrats. Oh, so Democrats are the cause of all this problems, is what they're thinking, using that terminology. So I object to the whole idea of using that term for this problem, because it has nothing to do with liberalism. Neoliberalism is a totally different thing, but it's a very misleading term. And that's what the right has been very good at over the last 70 years, is framing, and how they frame issues using certain terminology. It has always been their advantage.
I think you're right. That's a very good point. David, are you next?
I'll defer to David.
Okay, thanks.
It's complicated. But essentially, we're talking here about trying to anticipate, and what the major factors are going to be in how change comes about. How Dean was looking for where the rubber meets the road on, and I have to go back to last week's, because I just did that presentation last week. China has been very good at bringing 1 billion people from rural agriculture into the modern globalization, if you will, just as modern globalization is running the rapids, if you will. Thank you, Donald Trump. And you can see where Israel would really be nervous about Iran developing nuclear weapons.
I'm not nervous, but I know I understand.
You should be. You should also not cut in on other people who don't think quite as quickly as you do. I'm sorry, Dean. That is not only rude, it disrupts the whole discussion.
It's called a conversation, but you
no,
were
that's
reacting.
not what we're supposed to be.
You brought my
having.
name up. You mentioned Dean, so other people do it.
What I was trying to get to was an old satire about nuclear weapons by Tom Lear from the, is it 60s and 70s? The line that comes to mind from the song is, "Who's next?" And Israel is definitely nervous about their environment, but you can't solve global problems locally. It doesn't work. We're trying at this point to maintain our position of power in the world as a United States. Our century, if you will, was from 1945 to 1975. And we've been throwing our weight around ever since, thinking that we were the premier world power and trying to do things that cannot be done unilaterally in a unilateral fashion. And Donald Trump in Iran crossed the line. we're not going to be able to go back
Hmm.
to where we were 3 months ago. I would recommend a discussion that I saw just this week from The Great Simplification
Hmm.
for other people's consideration of this whole issue. Which is a good place for me to stop.
All right, if you stop with Carol's permission, because I deferred to you and then you responded to me. No, I get that. Israel is kind of the canary in the coal mine being the Middle East, right? I totally get that. But why is Iran having a nuclear weapon unacceptable and a threat? But China, who has been our enemy for 75 years, why is that not? Why is North Korea? You see what I mean? I mean, I don't get it.
The question is really whether intelligence is a survival trait.
Yeah.
And that the jury is still out on that question.
Well put, my friend.
Carol.
Yeah, Carol.
Yeah. Who's calling on people?
I've done it a little. I don't know who's in charge here.
Okay, I was just curious whether my name coming up was legitimate or, but I think, David, I agree with where you were going, but I think you missed a really major point when it came to the rise of China as an economic power, going from a bunch of peasants on the edge of starvation to the power that they are today. That could not have been accomplished without their brutal several generations of one-child policy. It could not have been accomplished except for their cutting down on the enormous growth of people.
I would argue with you on that, Carol. The statistics, the trends suggested that
they're backing off from it now, but
they had to. Yeah, it's complicated. But
yes,
the trends in China were that urbanization would have reduced the population growth that they implemented one child for without the engineering that they involved. The second book that I suggested last week differentiates between the United States as a society of lawyers and the CCCP as a society of engineers, and the differences in living under those two societies.
Now, by CCCP, you mean SSSR? The Union of
the Communist Party in China is the dominant political entity that is designing and engineering their society. Okay. It's really hard on the individuals in the society. By the way, the final take home from the book is that neither lawyers nor engineers do a good job of facilitating a society that people really want to live under. You want a fusion of both, but it's really hard to see what the trends are going to be under either extreme. You need some sort of middle ground, if you will. At least that's what the author suggests. And I'm inclined to agree with them. Moderation is, well, muddling through is hard to see what's really happening at the time.
Yeah. And I would feel that where their one-child policy went wrong or had implications that were not predicted was where it intersected with their incredibly misogynistic society, where if you were only going to allow people one child, they felt that child had to be a boy. And then all of a sudden you had a society in which females were incredibly scarce, and that leads to disaster. But
there are lots of ways to get to disaster, and they are certainly trying to change from the one child back to something
yeah, but
less extreme.
I would still say that the output of the one-child policy, and particularly the scarcity of females, because you know, the birth rate is directly proportional to the number of females of childbearing age. Men have practically nothing to do with it on the statistical front. That did enable them to drag China into a modern scientific society. Then can not only feed everybody, but educate everybody and put lots and lots of money into research.
Yeah. And to some extent, that was why I introduced the other half of last week's presentation. Why should we be helping them with our tendency to not trust science and not fund science? That's another way not to get where we think we want to go.
Yep.
Yep. I don't know who had their hand up first, Lynn or Dean.
Lynn is ahead of me.
Okay.
Thank you. So I have several comments. I really, really enjoy the discussion parts of these gatherings. And I especially enjoy it when everybody is polite and pitches their point of view in moderate tones and language. And so I appreciate the way it's been going today. There's always going to be someone who gets so excited about an idea that gets triggered that they just can't wait to throw that idea into the mix. And so we need to be both tolerant of those people and help them keep a rein on themselves. And I think, Dean, that you're very aware of your effect on a group, and you do a good job of trying to minimize yourself as a source of interruption. So I admire your efforts while being slightly unhappy about some of the results. Anyway, so that's one comment. Another comment is that I would like to bring into the discussion of future work, futurists' work, of forecasting, a piece of wisdom from a friend of mine in the 70s who wasn't a futurist, but he might as well have been. And one of his constant insertions into conversations was to consider what could go wrong here. whether you're playing a baseball game, designing a nuclear power, building a nuclear power plant, or designing an economy, you really need a think tank completely addressing the idea of what could go wrong here. And the third thing I wanted to say is that I would just love it if this group could develop the practice of having the discussion at the end framed with some concept, some overarching concept of really trying to forecast a particular future and saying what that, okay, this discussion is going to be about this particular future, probably based on the presentation, but maybe just one aspect of that. And maybe even trying to use some of these strategies that Dave has presented today, so that the discussions would be a little bit more structured and would actually be taking us somewhere down the road of practicing futurism. Thank you.
Yeah. Excellent comments.
I have to go, but it's thanks, Dave, for a great presentation.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
I put in the chat what I'm going to be talking about next week. Basically AI and advances in computing power and some possible implications of that, recent developments. So,
all right.
See you next week.
Yeah, thanks. See you.
Dave, I didn't see your list of resources in the chat.
Oh, did
Is
I
everybody else seeing them?
Huh.
I didn't go to look.
Oh yeah, it's there.
Yeah, there it is. So you don't see that?
Maybe you didn't scroll down far enough into the chat.
Oh, that could be.
It's one above Tom Walsh's got to go comment.
Yeah, I see your Clio Dynamics.
That's pretty
thing,
funny
and,
because I can see Clio Dynamics. I can see Peter's Teach the Future, and then that's
and
all
then
I
rubber
see.
hitting the road.
Scroll down. You got to
Somebody
refresh.
else please record the chat for me. Send me a copy.
I'm saving it every 30 seconds.
Yeah. And David, I can email it to you as well if you want, in case you have
Thank
trouble.
That would help.
Yeah.
Yeah, a group email would be great.
David, your computer may have blinked out just in time to not record that piece of the chat.
It happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so
All right,
next
so wait, I've had my hand up patiently. And Lynn, I know you and David and other people won't believe it, but I am trying to stifle myself all of the time because, you know, you guys just keep raising these things that are triggers for my sometimes too active brain. I'll blame it on Amazon because I got my delivery of yerba mate energy drink. Yeah, so quick comment about, we were talking about the leadership, lawyers, blah, blah, blah. I'm not in the 48th district in Southern California, but there's a guy running for Darrell Isis, who was our lone remaining Republican in SoCal. And he said, oh, he has these ads. Oh, we got 180 lawyers in Congress, and we got, you know, rodeo announcers, and we got all these people. He said, if you elect me, I will be the first ever trained economist in Congress. Well, yeah, let's get the economy into the discussion. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Yeah, I mean,
I'm reminded of Cassandra. Isn't the story something about she would be right, but nobody would believe her?
Yep.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And then real quick, Jesus, I lose my own train of thought. I derail myself.
You interrupt yourself sometimes.
My brain interrupts itself. Yeah.
Yeah. While you're, I was going to
Carol,
say,
go
while
ahead.
you're thinking, Carol, did you have a comment as well?
Yes, apropos your Cassandra, there is the one about if all the economists in the world were laid end to end, they still would not reach a conclusion.
Yep. Yep. You know, so I spent many years studying economics, my Master of Science and a PhD in environmental economics. And it's really, and then I worked as a research economist in the Forest Service for a number of years. But I came to a point where economics is a powerful tool for thinking and for useful for policy, but it's also a limiting tool. And so I reached a point, because I was working in natural resources and the environment, where I had to conclude that economics just does not encompass all of the values of the natural world. And so we needed other social science approaches to understand that and to bring it into public lands decision making, which is the context I was working in. But yeah, economics is great, but I was always kind of a what's the word, a contrarian economist, because I'd been reading ecological economists from when I was an undergraduate. So,
well, if I may answer that, I have pretty much always been a Friedmanite.
Oh, really?
But on good days, I'm a Milton Friedmanite, Chicago school. And on bad days, I'm a David Friedmanite with anarcho-capitalism.
Wow.
I mean,
is there some possible fusion? Middle road?
well, they
Synthesis?
were still arguing when Milton died, being father and son, economics people.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say it, but I'm going to have to go. I've got my weekly anti-Trump pedestrian bridge protest over the freeway, and I need to head off to that with my sign. And but thanks very much for having me, and look forward to joining in the future. And it's really exciting too. I think that Peter Bishop is willing to talk about various things, including his organization, because he really is. I absolutely believe this. He is the premier futures educator in the world. He is so good, and his organization is doing such good work.
And David is trying to snare him into a date for a publication. Thank you, David.
Yes.
Well, David, before you leave, have you ever heard of Nate Higgins?
Yes.
That's who I was talking to about.
Yeah. David,
his presentation came out yesterday.
Right.
Wait,
so David told me about Nate Higgins, and I've been watching a number of his videos, and including a couple of recent ones on thinking about the future. And what was this? It's part of a 4-part series about futures thinking, and it is excellent. He's really amazing.
Okay, because I think if he's an example of somebody who is conscious of, I mean, he has a background as a future, what's that, in economic, in financial.
Right.
He started out as a money manager on Wall Street.
Hedge fund manager.
Yeah.
Hedge fund manager.
And hedge funds, as far as I know, is the quantum mechanics of economics. It's where everything that goes on, it doesn't have any sense to the classic version of physics. But it's when you have to really lean in to understand what the hell it is. But bottom line is that I wanted to say, and then last thing I was going to say is that we did have an engineer as a president with Jimmy Carter.
Oh, right.
And that could be pro or con. I have an engineering friend who claims that Jimmy Carter's presidency was a disaster. I personally served in the military under Carter, and I thought it wasn't a disaster at all. I thought it really kind of graceful for me, because Carter, except for the last little business with Iran, did not engage much in military activity during his tenure.
Yeah.
Democracy is messy.
But thanks
Okay.
thanks very much for the presentation. Enjoy your protest.